Commander Redford Kalen had to apply his full measure of restraint to simply not groan or roll his eyes as George Lintar ranted passionately. Glancing to his right, Juliana Winfield was, as always, less tactful. Even Frederick Anderson and William Hempstroke, who usually sided with the old man, showed signs that they were reaching the limits of their patience. The prince was not present, though he did not know why. He wouldn't ask, however. If he needed to know, the prince would tell him in time. If not, then it was not of his concern. That the Drazen destroyer was captured. The surviving Drazen were dealt with and the ship's captain was captured. It's being interrogated as we speak, the old man said with an almost polite expression that turned into one of veiled mockery. It is a shame that the masterful display of your sister, Lady Cynthia, will go unrecognized, Juliana. Our duty was fulfilled, nothing more, Juliana replied as a frown adorned her features. Now, old man, have you grown tired of hearing your own voice, or will you continue torturing our ears with it? Lukacs Ishtal cleared his throat, masking a chuckle, while William and Hannah did not succeed. He only smiled at the more than deserved jab. George may be loyal, but he was set on his ways, and it was no secret that he enjoyed the political games that, in his opinion, plagued the nobility like a corrosive disease. George frowned. As a matter of fact, there is one more point that needs to be discussed, he said, turning to Redford with a glare. Commander Redford, may we know why that traitor has not been executed? The smile left his lips and his stern, serious persona returned. For the same reason he is in a Medicare pod, healing from his injuries, Commander George, he spat venomously. Wyatt Staples is not a traitor. George slammed a fist on the table in response. The device was found in his quarters. It is clear that he's been a traitor all along. To everyone's surprise, William Hempstroke was the first to counter his argument. If you believe in that obvious ploy at misdirection and falsehood, then I pity your division and I put in doubt your position as commander, George. Do not let your petty and contrived thoughts regarding commoners fog your vision. Wyatt Staples may be a lowly commoner, but he has already shown that he is talented, capable, and loyal, the red-haired man smirked. Or do you need to see his performance against 30 Drazen fighters again? Vivian let out a laugh. The woodshaft ace, they call him, and they have not seen the footage from the fighter's perspective. If we had another 100 pilots like him, I'm sure they would find a way to take down a battleship on their own. That pilot of yours is crazy, Redford, she ended with praise. George sneered at them both. He's still commoner trash, no matter his deeds. Can't you see that he has gained too much favor with the Prince and Princess Clara? The nerve! The sheer absurdity of that notion is enough to make my stomach turn with disgust. When has a lowly, worthless, flea-ridden commoner been close to royalty before? Frederick nodded. I must concur with your statement, George. Wyatt Staples, as a commoner, has no political, economic, or social strong points. That Princess Clara is showing so much, favoritism is worrying. The prince himself approves of him even. It is clear that Wyatt Staples is only seeking to extract privileges from their majesties. He must be stopped from enacting whatever vile, underhanded plans he has in mind. That is going far enough, Redford retorted. How dare you question our liege's decision? Wyatt Staples has shown himself as loyal and, unlike you, has no interest at all in any sort of power move. He lacks education and the knowledge to even begin to understand the ties and laws, written and in spirit, that bind nobility together. Why? He rasped. Why are you so insistent in bringing him down when we need men and women like him more than ever? Have you considered the consequences of what would happen if this conflict devolves into a civil war? The fact that Drazen raiders have penetrated this deeply without notice suggests that gaps in our borders have become visible. This conflict must be solved quickly, and Duke Draymore must be stopped. Once we arrive at Matcha, we will be able to consolidate our strength and move forth. I'm certain Duke Draymore is doing the same, Juliana reasoned. He's been 3 steps ahead of us so far, and we're racing to catch up. George and Frederick remained silent, but glared at Redford and Juliana in particular. Lukacs sighed. The prince insisted that I share the information about the QEC with his commanders, and this is what you do, bicker and argue as always, acting like we are not waging a war between conflicting royal houses, he admonished. Let me be perfectly clear regarding this issue. Wyatt Staples is not the traitor we are looking for. However, he has already outshone his betters. As such, measures must be taken against him. Redford stood up, glaring at Lukacs. Do not tell me you're planning to court-martial him regardless. What is his crime? Being competent, display exceptional valor and loyalty? Or is it merely the crime of being a commoner? Juliana leaned forth, her intense blue eyes glaring glaciers at her fellow commanders. Are you truly so cowardly that you quake in fear at the mere idea of a single man surpassing your deeds? Hannah Talaro cleared her throat. As much as I dislike such a notion, Juliana, I have to side with Lukacs. Lady Cynthia is receiving the praise she rightfully deserves for her masterful command of the Nornavio, she said, the name rolling out of her mouth with mild humor. But Lieutenant Wyatt's near-suicidal action has few supporters. Most of them come from the wedge he worked with during the battle, and a few other stragglers across the fighter divisions. Even my troops show some mild respect for his reckless behavior. But the rest see him as a potential threat, she said, glancing at Vivian Taravis, gaining a nod from her. Even among the commoner crew members, he's seen with derision and jealousy. Frederick crossed his arms. Redford has a point. As much as I agree that Wyatt Staples has to be dealt with, there has to be a valid motive. Times are trying, but he is still a member of the Royal Navy, and thus we can't simply toss him away. Not to mention he is a lieutenant. Any ideas? I will not allow this mockery to continue unchallenged, Redford said, still standing proudly. I cast a vote of doubt upon Lukacs Ishtal's proposal. Those in favor? To his dismay, only Juliana joined his hand. Outvoted, he sighed in frustration. Very well. What say you, Lukacs? I cast a vote of exclusion upon Redford Kalon. Those in favor? To Redford's surprise, no one raised a hand aside from Lukacs. Noted. Then we shall proceed as normal. Wyatt Staples shall be detained aboard the Nornavio under charges of suspected lèse-majesté and conspiracy against the life and well-being of Princess Clara and Lady Cynthia, not to mention a suspected case of murder perpetrated against a Bacchus Reed. That dimwit's death was of his own doing, Redford protested. A noble still died under the leadership of a commoner, George said. It is a crime that cannot be overlooked, not to mention a dire breach in the conduct and traditions of the Royal Navy as a whole. I second the motion. So do I, William Hemstroke added. Redford watched in silence as one by one the rest of his fellow commanders agreed on the charges set against his pilot. It wasn't nearly enough evidence to convict him of anything, but it was enough for them to excuse sidelining Wyatt, at least for a time. Glaring at them all, he turned to Juliana, the only one who rejected the motion alongside himself. It seems we are outvoted. The prince shall hear about this. He already knows, Lukacs said, his cybernetic eyes flickering light for a moment. He has agreed with the charges presented, but wishes that Wyatt Staples be treated fairly and with due diligence. In that case, there is nothing more for us to discuss, Redford said, turning to leave as Juliana also stood up. Vivian raised an eyebrow. We have yet to decide who shall command the new ship, she pointed out. The prince shall decide that himself, Juliana replied, sharing Redford's visible disgust. You may continue plotting against brave, innocent lives now, cowards, said the blue-haired woman, and the two commanders left the room side by side. They walked for several minutes in silence, ignoring their escorts walking behind them and the crew members they stumbled across their way. But they were not silent, not outwardly at least. It seems the prince's plan was a success, said Juliana through a secured, encrypted channel between the two. Now it is only a matter of time for the traitor to bite the bait. As much as I dislike using Wyatt and putting his life on the line, it has to be done. However, I can't understand the reason behind planting the QEC in his quarters. The traitor had to know that attempt would end in utter failure, Redford replied. Perhaps it was a desperate measure. Lukacs and Vivian's efforts were breathing down their necks. Personally, I believe this to be nothing more than a distraction and a futile attempt to gain some time. Most likely, that wasn't the only QEC at their disposal. But if it was, then that means the traitors are hiding and preparing, she replied, and paused for a moment. Will this truly work, Redford? I don't know, something doesn't feel right. We're missing a piece of the puzzle, and I do not like how it looks, he replied. Perhaps it is related to the reason why the prince didn't attend the meeting? She asked with mild concern. I'm certain the prince will inform us if we need to know, Juliana. Patience is a virtue we all must practice and master, the older man replied. In that case, I should be thankful that there are idiots like George who test such virtues with their incomprehensible pretentiousness, she replied, and they shared a short laugh. The two said nothing more as they neared the prince's quarters. The Royal Marines allowed them entry upon their arrival, and soon they were in the same room alongside the prince, Princess Clara, and Cynthia. The two commanders immediately noticed that the two younger women were visibly distraught, while the prince was pensive. Before any of them could inquire about what had managed to disturb the princess and her bodyguard, the prince spoke up. "Redford, Juliana, do you detest the treason?" he asked, his tone serious and straight. "I do, my prince," Juliana was the first to reply. "Marines, ROSF units, and army soldiers are usually the first responders to treason incursions. This incident is, sadly, not an uncommon occurrence. I've had the immense displeasure of battling treason raiders many times. I have not interacted with one directly outside my cockpit, but I hold no love for those detestable aliens," Redford replied. The prince hummed softly. "I am no stranger to the treason and their way of thinking. Dealing with them is not an easy task, less so when the raiders operate outside the collective's boundaries. Outlaws, renegades, criminals, savage murderers," he chuckled darkly, "at least on paper. My prince, forgive me for saying this, but what does it matter? Treason raiding assaults are an annoyance and a true tragedy to those who suffer them. There is no doubt about that. Regardless of anything, Duke Draymor's coup and betrayal outweigh the threat of those unholy creatures," said the older blue-haired woman in a submissive tone. The prince stared into her eyes for several seconds, then turned to his sister. She slowly blinked in response, and then he turned to Cynthia. "Show them." Cynthia bowed her head, and the screen display next to her came to life a second after her armor connected to it. The black screen was replaced by the picture of Wyatt Staples inside his Medicare pod. Then the video began to play, and the two commanders were introduced to Wyatt's tale about his experience with the treason. By the time it was over, they saw his raging outburst and the subsequent sedation. "By all that is good and holy," Juliana said, mirroring her sister's downward expression, "it is a miracle that he's functioning at all." Redford nodded, crossing his arms. "That amount of mental trauma should have broken his mind. He has remarkable strength." "I believe it is not so simple," Clara said, glancing at the now still image of a sleeping Wyatt. "We saw his mask break. He secluded himself within himself since he was but a mere child. I think he truly doesn't have any friends, at all. We don't know how his time at the academy truly was, but what little we know so far shows it wasn't a pleasant time either. He has a noble soul, and I believe he is an honorable man in his peculiar way," Cynthia added. "And yet when he took command of the Noir Navio, he showed remarkable competence and measured bloodlust, focused, aimed, precise. Given such traits and his innate talent and capabilities, there is no telling what he could achieve. He is not only talented, he has immense potential that could be exploited in the right circumstances," Redford reasoned. "He killed Samuel Caiston without hesitation, ignoring all sense of decorum and the rules of combat. I doubt he even knows what they are. He took command of the Noir Navio, even if your logic was flawless, Cynthia. If any of the others discover the truth, they will demand Wyatt's head for overreaching or breaking the line that separates nobility and commoners." Juliana groaned. "Nobles lead, commoners follow. Nobility rules, civilians obey. Sadly, the words of the great Julius Astor have been warped and forgotten over the centuries." "George would have a heart attack if he heard you," the prince joked. "As it stands, Wyatt Staples has become an unwilling player in our current problem. Now that I know about his past, I am conflicted about using him as a pawn in this plan of ours." "It would break whatever bond we've formed so far with him," Cynthia reasoned, and watched as her princess's left hand twitched slightly. They had met the pilot not too long ago, but already he had proven himself as more than a mere anomaly. Everything she'd told him rang true. She now trusted him, for she'd seen that he was loyal without the vice of power clouding his vision. More importantly, her princess and best friend Clara had come to appreciate him even more. At first, it was curiosity and a selfish indulgence to satiate her hobby, but then she grew interested in him personally, and now she saw in Wyatt not a pawn or a useful tool, but a friend, a treasure that Clara valued immensely. So to imagine that Wyatt would turn away from them if he discovered he had been betrayed and used by the people he had perhaps started to trust left a bad taste in her mouth. She was sure he'd leave them at the first chance he got. She was equally certain that even with the betrayal, he wouldn't go running to Duke Draymore's side. Instead, he'd commit desertion, and they would lose a man with incredible potential forever. Then, why don't we do something he'd do? Clara asked all of a sudden, and all eyes turned to her. Something crazy and unorthodox, outside the box. Why not? She paused for a moment and then snapped her fingers. Why don't we treat this as if it was a dogfight? The following silence was palpable, and the princess blushed in slight embarrassment. The prince stood up and walked over to his desk where a chessboard rested with its pieces untouched. He stared at it for several moments in silent contemplation before turning to his sister. Explain. An eager smile spread across her face. We are a wedge, she began, and the traitor is the enemy wedge. Our mission is not to destroy them, but to force them to make a mistake without any of us taking damage. We need to weave and turn in ways that they don't expect us to act. We must make use of our greater mobility to outmatch them completely. Currently, they are hidden among an asteroid field, but we know they are there. How do we draw them out? With a convincing decoy. Redford nodded. Wyatt is the decoy in this situation, but I fail to understand your strategy, Clara. It is quite simple, Redford. We cheat, Clara said, as if stating the obvious. A decoy is usually a drone or something similar, correct? Redford nodded. What is our enemy expecting from us? To lure them out so we may attack. But they will hardly do anything about it if they expect this to be a trap. We are a wedge, she repeated. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It is a fair fight. Let's make it unfair. Let's go to battle with our wedge by having a hidden sixth member. Juliana barked out a laugh while Redford's mouth opened slightly. Cynthia was stunned but smiling, and the prince turned to his chessboard before gently flicking a pawn over. My dear sister, are you proposing we inform Wyatt about our plan, that we turn the decoy into a pilot? Would that not put at risk our chances of capturing the traitor red-handed? If I may, Cynthia interjected, and the prince gave her a nod. I've seen Wyatt in action personally, my prince. I believe he can not only be trusted with this information, but actively help us. He knows well how to hide his emotions and conceal his intentions. It would require something extreme as what made him revive his past and everything that happened before for him to break again. That is a risky but brilliant idea, Redford commented. Our enemy is expecting us to make a move regarding Wyatt's position. Would they expect the prince to rely on a mere commoner instead of simply using him as a tool? I believe not. Risky. But this is a development our little traitor won't expect, Juliana said with a wide, viscous smile. I like it. My prince, she said, turning to face the blond man. If this succeeds, may I attempt to lure Wyatt Staples into pledging allegiance to House Winfield? Denied, the prince replied with a smirk. Juliana merely shrugged, also smirking. Redford, go to Wyatt and inform him of our plan. We shall need his aid. It shall be done, my liege, Redford said, saluting and bowing courtly before the young blond man. I wish to accompany you, Redford, Clara said, joining his side. After opening up to us and what you are going to tell him, seeing a pair of friendly faces might be beneficial for his emotional stability. Redford raised an eyebrow curiously. A sound tactical move, princess? Shush, you! When Wyatt woke up from a dreamless sleep, he was in a far better condition. But with the constant, silent vigilance of a Royal Marine as his only company, he was bereft of any means to pass the time. Left alone with his thoughts, his mind wandered. The pain was completely gone, which was a welcomed change. The AI also informed him that the damage to his Dulaxis implant had been contained and, much to his relief, replaced during his slumber, and did not require him to endure the pain of adapting to it once more. He would be cleared to leave in a few hours, which was a good thing. He had grown tired of being stuck for at least 3 whole days. even if most of that time he spent sleeping. However, what occupied his mind the most was what he told the two women, and his subsequent breakdown. He hadn't been in his right mind, and he had allowed emotions to explode in full before other people. What do they think of me now, I wonder? Do they think I'm dangerous? Do they think I'm just alive because I got lucky? Do they despise me for threatening the life of a noble? Wyatt thought grimly. He hardly knew them, but in just a couple of weeks he'd gone through numerous situations with them that allowed him to get to know them better than anyone else for as long as he could remember. Cynthia was steadfast, loyal, a stickler for rules and protocol, and outwardly cold. When he met her, he saw her as a wall of ice and titanium that would not bend. But now he knew there was a warmer, caring person behind that wall. Her loyalty toward Clara was absolute and unquestionable, and she was not afraid to speak her mind when it was necessary. That was without taking into account her deadly abilities in combat. On the other hand, Clara was far more approachable and gentle. She was curiously shy in some aspects, but forward in others, easily excitable and brimming with curiosity and genuine kindness. A rarity among nobles, let alone royalty. But beneath that, she was shown to be capable of ruthlessness and a savvy mind that honestly scared him. It was as if her personality switched if her negotiation with Uriel Hoax was a common occurrence. But instead of making demands, which she had full authority to do, she preferred to take a mutually beneficial approach. That alone, and her refusal to leave Woodshaft for the sake of the people living there, had cemented his respect for her. So what do they think of me now? Perhaps I should consider desertion, after all. He thought to himself a minute before the doors to the medical bay opened, and through those gates walked three figures. Clara, Cynthia, and— "Commander Redford?" he said out loud, glad that his throat no longer rasped nor ached. "I see that you are in much better health, Lieutenant," Redford said as they approached his pod. "How are you feeling, Woodshaft's ace?" "I'm feeling— Wait, Woodshaft's ace?" he asked, taken aback. He turned to the two women present and saw that Cynthia gave him a "what did you expect?" look while Clara giggled softly. "Your reckless stunt against the Drazen fighters has been taken to heart among the people of Woodshaft. They know your name, Wyatt. The actions of the Noir Navio truly outshine your deeds, but as an opening move to the battle against the Drazen, it was quite a spectacle. You've earned the title of ace more than twice over, Wyatt Staples. Congratulations are in order," Redford said, but his face did not convey his words. "Ace, I'm an ace?" he asked out loud, only to then realize that he, indeed, had earned the right to bear such a title. He blushed slightly, suddenly remembering his near-nudeness. Inspecting Redford's expression further, his bashfulness gave way to worry. "I see, Commander. Then, does that mean I shall be executed?" It was a good thing that he knew more about Wyatt after Cynthia's revelation and the recording of his past and breakdown, otherwise he'd be shocked at the frightening leap of logic on display. Glancing to his left, he saw that both Clara and Cynthia were also not surprised. Nevertheless, he had to ask, "Why do you believe achieving such a thing would warrant your death, Wyatt Staples?" Wyatt chuckled softly. After pouring his heart out, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders, and he felt more at ease with himself. It didn't make things easier, but the burden was not as cumbersome anymore. Outshining the accomplishments only reserved for nobles deserves punishment. I was already treading on rotten timber when I won the competition. Now I've surely gained the ire of many nobles, have I not? He asked, hiding his bitterness. I don't mind dying. At least now I know that they don't look at me differently, and I helped save thousands of lives while burning thousands more Drazan. Let that be enough. A commoner cannot ask for a more dignified end. There is some backlash, yes, but the enemy in this case is hated by all. I'm afraid that while your situation and the circumstances are bothersome to deal with, there is another pressing matter that, sadly, involves you personally, Redford clarified. It has been decided that you will be detained and put under court-martial to review your offenses and possible collusion with traitors, he said, and raised a hand when Wyatt's mouth went agape. Let me finish. Wyatt barely contained the burst of rage burning in his chest after hearing that accusation. Me, a traitor? Not even in my worst days has that idiotic idea crossed my mind. Desertion is one thing, but treason. He raged internally for a few seconds, then looked at the two women who, in turn, gave him reassuring looks that choked the fire out. The QEC was found in your quarters, Lieutenant. Do not fret, for we do not question your loyalty. The traitor sought to get rid of a potential enemy at the same time as sowing disunion and chaos between our ranks. This, however, presents us with a unique opportunity to find the head of the Viper and cut it down. And you, Wyatt Staples, may be able to aid your prince further, Redford explained calmly. Wyatt's eyes widened for a moment, and he nodded. No, I forbid it, Clara interjected all of a sudden, her expression firm and serious. You will not just obey, Wyatt. This puts your life at risk, and I'm afraid you won't be able to mat a fighter, or command the Noir Navio to fight this enemy. Wyatt paled at her confession. He knew that Cynthia was bound to tell Clara about him taking command of the Noir Navio. That was also a given regarding the prince. But now that Redford knew, he was sure. Why doesn't he look surprised or outraged that a mere commoner dared to sully such a vessel with its hands? As if reading his mind, the older man spoke. I already know. So does Commander Juliana and, of course, my prince. It was thanks to your actions and Cynthia's quick thinking of a loophole that ensured our crushing victory over the Drazen raiders. Know that His Majesty the Prince is immensely proud and grateful for saving not only countless lives and ships, but also for saving the life of his beloved sister for a second time, Lieutenant. As I am, Redford said, and then did the unthinkable. He bowed his head respectfully for a short moment. Warning, patient's heart rate is increasing to dangerous levels, the AI chimed in. While Redford blinked in confusion and Wyatt was trying to not hyperventilate, Clara approached the pod until she placed a hand on the crystal. He is not a noble showing respect to you, Wyatt. He is a man thanking you, nothing more. Just a man, he repeated, slowly getting his breathing under control. I know that. He's just a man, but he's still a noble, my direct superior. For him to thank a lowly commoner with such a gesture and not mere empty words, it is unthinkable, and yet I have received it. I don't know how to feel about this, he thought, but he still managed to keep himself from passing out or being sedated again. He glanced at the princess and her bodyguard and felt a wave of tranquility wash over him, just enough to let him get a grip on his emotions once more. A nod signaled that he was under control. As I was saying, Clara continued, this is a battlefield in which we are more familiar than you are. We ask you to place your life in our hands, but I will not allow you to blindly obey such a command. I want you to decide for yourself, not as a commoner, but as Wyatt Staples. Understood? Wyatt nodded slowly. Then he watched Clara step back until she stood next to Cynthia. Redford stepped up and sighed deeply. Lieutenant Wyatt Staples, you will be detained and placed under arrest. Tomorrow, you shall be court-martialed. Be not afraid. The prince will not allow harm to come to you. We require that you act as you normally would upon the charges you will be accused of with a minor distinction. He raised a finger. We need you to be insulting and abrasive, just enough to make the traitor in our midst believe that you could be swayed to their side as retaliation. Wyatt stopped himself, only briefly glancing at Clara. What do I do now? I can't refuse a request made by the prince himself, but at the same time, I can't refuse Clara's request. Come to think of it, why are they telling me in the first place? I'm a commoner. Even if the traitor approaches me, what am I to do? There's no need to tell me any of this unless they think I'm valuable. But what can the life of a single commoner achieve in this situation? Ugh, think, Wyatt. How would you handle this if this were a dogfight with nothing to... His train of thought came to a crashing halt as a small but wicked smile spread across his lips. Am I to act as a living decoy to lure our enemies out so that you can strike them from when they least expect it? Clara smiled, proud of herself, while Cynthia shook her head slowly. Redford limited himself to give a single approving nod. Wyatt closed his eyes for a moment, his mind already weighing the pros and cons of such a plan, and concluded that a traitor, a noble, would not expect that the prince would ever rely on a commoner to execute his plan. But that won't be enough to lure the mastermind out. What could ensure the trap to spring? He asked himself as dozens of options and scenarios ran across his mind until a risky idea manifested itself. Commander Redford, he said after a minute of silence. "I will aid the prince at the fullest of my abilities." His grin intensified. "Loyalty is its own reward." "Loyalty is its own reward," Redford replied, the hint of a proud smile appearing on his lips. Then he closed his eyes. "The prince shall be happy to learn of your willing cooperation, Lieutenant." "Wyatt," Cynthia said firmly, "what are you planning to do?" She asked firmly, ready to stop him from pulling another stunt like he did before during the fight against the Drazen. He turned to the blue-haired woman. "Since I'll be acting as a decoy, how about instead I become a tactical mine?